Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Dualistic Unity. I am everyone.
And today I'll be playing the part of Ray again. It's been an amazing week again, man. Just so much happening.
So much. For those tuning in, I took 4 grams of mushrooms yesterday, and it was it was a great ride, and I'm excited to discuss that with someone who has done it many times, much more than I have. Not trying to convince anyone to do anything. Obviously, I think my state of mind is very primed for experiences like that.
Very
Certainly, it wasn't jarring for me at all. It was like what I already knew, and it became more clear to me that it makes sense why people who take mushrooms, like some of them, their eyes are, more open. Some of them, it's just like a fun trip, stuff gets wiggly, but it doesn't actually teach you anything necessarily. It gives you the opportunity to see things if you're ready. So for if you're very much think that, you're this human and that's all you are, all you ever will be, and you're born on a day and you'll die on a day, like I can see why it would lead to a bad trip or something, because it cuts you down, peels things back. Like, nope, you're not just that. You're everything, and you always have been.
That's right. And it's funny because you don't necessarily need psychedelics to achieve that by any means. I mean, a lot of people have, through practice meditation, through different techniques such as yoga or Tai Chi, things like that. They're just getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the moment, deeper and deeper away from our mind. But in the world that we live in right now, and I know I've had this conversation many times, there are so many influences that exacerbate our stress. There are so many things that are constantly just pounding us over the head with the need to think about ourselves, that it becomes very difficult to establish that practice. And so psychedelic experiences are often a way to kind of shortcut your way past that stress. But there's a danger as well in that, because then you almost expect it to be that easy when you're not being helped. And so it's important to remember that while they can be a shortcut, they are a shortcut to work that you are still doing and will continue doing once the psychedelics have worn off. That process that you're going through in that experience continues on into sobriety. You're just not as aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I've seen. Is so my experience, I can kind of get into that in more detail, but basically everything was so obviously clear when I was going through it, and it certainly stayed with me. But there have been, like, my identification with Andrew and fears and wants, like I can feel them trying to like get back in, and I latch onto it. And when I was going through, yesterday for a few hours, there was none of that. And everything was so clear. And so afterwards, I still have that sort of clarity feeling, which I was already feeling before I ever tried any sort of psychedelics. But I see how people can get right back into their patterns, essentially, if they think that it's all, the mushrooms or whatever psychedelics they're taking. So
that's often what happens. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happens. It's like, it's the psychedelics doing the work. It's like, no, it was always you doing the work. It was always you. And if you take responsibility from that, you can continue to do it. But if you pass it off, then you're not going to learn anything from it. If anything, you're actually going to get farther away, disregarding those uncomfortable insights as just, the drugs, instead of, no, it just makes me uncomfortable and I don't want to look at it right now because I'm not relaxed enough to feel that I can look at it and not be afraid. And that's really all it is, right? Is that you cut your strings and you're like, I can look at anything because nothing is terrifying to me, right? I'm perfectly good being uncertain, so bring on the insights. Whereas the rest of the time, when we're overcommitted to the idea that we need to be in control, or that there's a me to be in control, that's all just riddled with fear. There's nothing to do there except be afraid and defend that idea of yourself. And so you can't take in insights. Everything is a threat to you.
Yeah, it hit me like nothing can go wrong. There is no, like, that is what anxiety and fear stem from, is the idea that something could go wrong. And it can't. And you can make up a story that it could if you're identified with certain things and attached to certain things, and something changes and all of a sudden you perceive that as something bad happening or something wrong happening. And it's like, there is no wrong. How could anything go? How could it even go wrong? What does that even mean? In what sense? And so I can get into, I don't know if I can run through quick, like what I did yesterday and what I took and whatnot. I
Absolutely,
basically,
for sure. I just
yeah.
want to make the quick point, and it's important to remember that the implications of what we're talking about are huge in terms of how we can apply this to mental health. Because in mental health scenarios, we're often trying to come up with coping mechanisms. We're trying to gain context. We're exploring our past, our history, our trauma, so on and so forth. And in that, we almost perpetuate that journey because we're trying to come to a resolution. Whereas the mentality we're talking about is to go, right, that big scary dinosaur in my head of that memory is just a fly. If I can change my perspective of my power within this relationship or of my role within my existence. And so the implications are massive for what we can do in our day-to-day life. But it's interesting that it's this conversation that leads us to those insights. So by all means, explain what you've been going through this week, because that's great.
So for those listening, we talked about it last week, but I tried some for the first time last weekend, basically. And throughout the week, kind of every other day, I was trying out different like micro doses. And then yesterday I figured I could handle more. And so I took 3 grams. And then an hour and a half later, I took another extra gram, as Ray refers to as the kicker, which I think definitely hit me in that second wave a little bit more strongly. It was great. And basically, so I have here, I have this, it's a acoustic soundboard thing that I got. This is like acoustic soundboard too, just like, so my room is quieter and sound stays in. And then in my room, I have this like psychedelic type flag it's like a greenery cave with a bunch of mushrooms on either side, and then it's kind of looking out into space. So I start yeah. So starting out, probably, what was it, 20 minutes in, stuff started getting a little wobbly, and I was like, "Ooh, this is weird." And then I was like, "No, it's okay. This is what's supposed to be happening." So I like, there was a split second where I was like, "Oh," and then I was like, "No, it's okay." And then I sort of relaxed into it. And then I was staring at that thing, the world, for a while, and it started like moving. And then it was like, it started breathing. And I was like, it started to hit me like, so it's all just happening. And we are this earth just happening. And it's sort of like everything individually happening. It's just like the earth sort of breathing. Yeah. And then I was there for probably 15 minutes just in this chair, just staring at that. Then I was like, I should go check out that new psychedelic thing I got with all the mushrooms and stuff. That would probably be pretty cool to look at. So I looked at that, and that's where stuff really started to hit me. That was probably 45 minutes in. And I just laid down on my bed with my pillow under my head, just staring at it. And it started moving a lot. It was like flashing and stuff was wiggling. And it was almost like they took me back to that. It was like, this flag is earth with mushrooms on it, just like a bunch of beautiful greenery looking out into space. And it's like, that was what earth was. And it's sort of like it transported me in a sense back to, millions of years ago, before any humans were around. And it just became very clear that this is what has always been. And we just came through evolution of, more recently was through apes. Before that, probably, I don't know if I don't know, but yeah.
Mycelium. We came from mushrooms.
Yeah. Yeah. So
right.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I wasn't sure. So I was like, I don't know exactly, but it became very clear that we came from the earth. And it just is, and everything just is. And that's what kept hitting me. Like, everything just is, everything has always been. What could be otherwise? What could be before what's been? That's just what's been. And this idea of the observer and the observed, it couldn't be other, and there is no separation. It's just what is and always has been. And this idea of, any sort of belief, any sort of religion, everything that we've built upon the earth is just a layer, and it's not what is our belief. Well, it is and it isn't. Like, it is what is because it is, but it's also not. It's like our idea of what is, and any religion is just a story that we've layered on top of, oh no, this is what is. And it's like, it's always just been what is, and we happen to come out of the earth over millions, hundreds of millions of years. We came to this point, but it's always just been, and the only thing there ever is what is now.
And
And
that's all
that's
we're
what
ever trying to describe.
anyone's ever talked about,
That's it.
basically.
And every time people who don't have the clarity take the words and focus on the words, or they take the actions and focus on the actions of that person who had that moment of clarity, instead of realizing, oh, it's just the clarity. It's the clarity that's doing it. It's not the yoga. It's not the Tai Chi. It's not the Tibetan singing bowls. It's none of that. That's all lovely if you're in a state of clarity, but it doesn't replace clarity. This is why Krishnamurti was saying that the messenger is always a traitor. And we can't help it. There's nothing we can do about it, because we can try and be as clear as possible, but that doesn't guarantee the message is going to come across, which is why Jesus always said, let those who have ears to hear, hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's almost like it's so obvious.
Of course it is. It's what it is.
And all that there is there is nothing to do. There is nowhere to go. There is nowhere to be. There is nowhere to come from or go to. It's just what is. The only thing I think anyone like us in this podcast could ever do is try and like sort of like the mushrooms do, just peel back and question, why do you believe this to be this is what is. This is what is. And that's it. How could it be?
and that's the thing, right? And that's exactly why I find it so funny that there are so many follow these 10 steps to enlightenment, or follow these 12 stages to peaceful living. It's like, it's a one-step process. It's just one step that you have to continuously repeat. You don't get to stop practicing this one step, which is always just increasing or allowing your awareness to act, right? But how do you make that into a profitable business? How do you turn that into a book that people are going to come back to and read over and over and over again, right? I've had so many people say, can you write a book? And it's like, no, because if I do, it's going to be even harder to compensate for the message that's coming through. Here, I can do it through speaking, but in a book, you're just going to take what I've written and run with it. And I'd rather be in the conversation. I'd rather be somewhere in that living dialogue where I can at least account for some of the misinterpretation. But it always comes back down to, it's a one-step process. Improve your awareness and everything else will follow.
Yeah, it's hard. It is hard to put into words any sort of situation, because it isn't the word. It's not words, like Alan Watts has some speeches about that. It's like, how can you can't say what reality is, because reality isn't words. So it just is. And it's like, so I don't know if I want to say obvious, because it's clearly not, but it almost is. Yeah.
But our problem is lack of clarity. And this is something that's really dawned on me over time, is that as a species, we tend to put thought and logic on a pedestal, like it is the epitome of human intelligence. But thought is actually degraded intelligence. Thought, conceptual thought is all dualism. It's all, me versus that, you versus them, dark versus light. There's no whole context. There's no understanding of the whole picture. It's always just categorized sections, right? And so when we are being truly intelligent, it's almost like we're not thinking, or rather the processing is happening on another level entirely. It's not conceptual. And that's the process we were talking about, like catching a baseball, for example, right? You're not conceptualizing the ball. That's why I find the expression "be the ball" to be so goddamn funny. because that's exactly what you're doing in that moment. You're letting go of the disconnect between the ball happening and you happening. And so you just catch the ball, because that's the completion of what is for that cycle, right? And so we almost get out of our way and allow ourselves to be what reality is, which is intelligence manifest.
Yeah. Yeah. And that idea of everyone, any words that you use or thoughts or intelligence is just coming from a perspective of what is. So it couldn't, how could you put into words or express or explain what is from one perspective, even from your, you're 5 feet tall or you're 7 feet tall, like even from like literally a physical perspective, how could you express things in the same way? It's like it's impossible. And I was walking around, so I it was probably, I don't know when I texted you, I was, venturing out and I almost turned around as soon as I walked outside because I was like, I'm tripping balls right now. And I started like dying laughing, like right outside my door. And I turned around and I was like, I can do
I
this.
can
I
do
can
this.
do this. And it was probably after 2 hours of taking the first dose. I took the first one at like 1:30 and it was like 3:30. So it was only like less than an hour after the kicker too. And I was walking around and I was like, had a big old shit-eating grin
Oh
on
yeah.
my face, just like walking around, like no like structure whatsoever. It was
That's
just
right.
like so loose. And it was Saturday midday in New York City, so it was crowded. It was very crowded. And I was like, I would start laughing here and there. I was like, ooh, people, I wonder what I look like to other people right now. I probably look like I'm tripping balls on something because
I always do. I got to tell you, like I know for a fact, because I don't I don't hold anything back on my face, right? Because I don't care if anybody's looking at me. So I have the same, very much the same attitude when I go out into the world as you did yesterday. It's just whatever. I'm here for me. This is my experience. This is what I'm here for. I will sit and I will talk to a squirrel. I will suddenly stop in the middle of walking and go, huh, that's really, really interesting. And nobody's there. And I know people are driving by looking at me going, huh, I don't care. I don't care at all. Because I mean, at the very worst, what's going to happen is somebody's going to go home and go, I was just watching this crazy dude on the street, just going through this process, and they're going to laugh about it. And I've just improved my own day through them by not giving a shit.
Mhm, definitely. And I was walking around like smiling and I knew every single person walking past me. I mean, I don't know for sure, but like, it's likely that they were looking at me like wondering what I'm smiling about, and they were probably wondering if like they had some, like they looked weird or something, just because of my own past experiences of that. Like someone was
Mhm.
walking around with a massive smile on their face, kind of laughing, be like, what's going on here? Like, is there something on my shirt? And
Right.
it, it was just, I was just tripping balls and there was nothing to do with anyone else whatsoever.
But that was
And
it,
it
right?
was, that's what, yeah.
Whether you were tripping balls or not, the important part was that you were living strictly for you in that moment. Everybody else's perception of you was irrelevant, and that's why you looked so free and so happy. And what's funny is that people will see you in that state, and immediately they'll go exactly what you're saying. Is he looking at me? What is it? Something I'm wearing? And blah blah blah. And you're almost in a state where it's like, if you stop doing that, you could join me, right? If you just let all that go, you'd be just as stoked to be here as I am, right? And that's the power of being free of our stuff, of being free of our ego, is that we walk around the world being an embodiment of that freedom. People see us, whether we're tripping balls or we're sober, because we're so free. People see us and they go, I don't know what that is, but I'd like to experience a bit more of it. My father-in-law had actually said that to me when I first met him years ago, and we didn't hit it off, well at first, because we have different mentalities. He asked me, like, where do you want to be in 5 years? And my response was, in a state of mind where I don't care where I am in 5 years. That was my answer, right? And so after getting to know me for a while, he said, I don't understand where you're coming from, but I would like to. I would like to see a little bit more of that in my own life. And it's like, Well, that's great, but it's kind of a commitment. Like you actually have to commit to, it's not just a little bit when you're feeling a consequence. It has to be 24/7. It's a 24/7 thing. Like you're either on the ball or you're not. You're either, questioning yourself or you're getting comfortable, but it's one or the other all the time. Right. And that's it. So if you're doing that in your day-to-day life, you're going to walk around the world with an expression on your face like you're just having a great time. You're going to be more open as a result, and people are going to feel more comfortable letting go of their thoughts about themselves. That's the wonderful part about that power of not trying to save the world, is that you change the world as a result.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And I do find myself, walking around even when I'm not, especially the last couple months, just it really, that feeling of self-consciousness has decreased significantly. And now that, I know that I'm everyone, it's like, what could there possibly be to be self-conscious about? It's almost like cuts through the whole thing. And it's like, name something,
Yep.
and you can't, like, you just
Yep.
can't.
Well, as people will say, like, you're a bit of an asshole sometimes. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. I have that in me for sure. I have everything in me. Name it. It's all in there. Like I have nothing to defend. I'm awareness, the worst villain to the best hero, and everything in between. So there's no point in defending myself. That's just me trying to hold on to an idea, which just limits me from all the other insights. I'd prefer to be free and completely unpredictable
Yeah,
because it's more
me
fun.
too. Yeah, yeah, and just the idea of holding on to beliefs, because I think you posted a video recently talking about, the clinging to beliefs, and this was a few days ago, and I said I wanted to talk about it on the podcast with things like religion. And people, they'll say, just because you don't believe in it doesn't mean I don't have to. Just let me believe what I believe. And now, after yesterday, it's a lot clearer why it's like just stories about that you're clinging to, that you don't have to.
No,
And
but they make me
it's,
feel secure,
yeah,
right? Because I'm holding on to other stories that make me feel afraid. That's the thing about cognitive dissonance, is that we will commit to a certain strategy or a certain perception or a certain way of looking at ourselves in the world, and we do that in order to feel secure or to feel more stable or to feel morally superior, whatever it might be. But the consequence that comes with that strategy is always fear and frustration and defensiveness and everything else. But because we're so committed to the benefit of the strategy, we won't tie the consequence to that strategy. We'll actually say, like, I can't figure it out. Like I always need to be on the ball. I'm always doing my task list and I still can't figure out why I'm so anxious. It's like because of that they're the same problem. Like you're overcommitted to control, so that's creating more fear, right? But we don't want to tie them together, because then if I do that, I have to stop. I have to stop overcommitting to control if I recognize it's also the source of my fear. But I don't like that because I'm overcommitted to control. And so we immediately have this cognitive dissonance where it's like, no, they can't be related. And we go in circles trying to avoid. It's like a dog chasing its tail.
yeah. And that idea of control, there's nothing, it's an illusion. So you can't even, you can try for it all you want, but yeah, it's like a dog chasing its tail, or like a hamster running in a wheel, or like, an asymptote. It just, there is no, you think you can get to it, but there's no getting to it. So and that idea of getting to it, when you start to retract from it, takes away. And that's what leads to the opposite, or anxiety or whatever. But if you can realize that there is no control, there is no belief that you have to have about anything, then
That's it.
there is the opposite,
Do you see how that's counterintuitive?
diminishes too.
Our brain does not like that. I said it years ago. The biggest kick in the teeth for seekers of truth is that there's no truth to seek, right? Because we define ourselves by that journey, and we hold ourselves in great esteem because it's like, oh, I'm going towards enlightenment, and then you get there and you're like, I wasn't going anywhere. I could have played Mario Kart and I would have been fine, right? Like it's just because it doesn't matter what you're doing in that state. That's the amazing part about it, is that we spend so much time trying to act spiritual or to act enlightened, and then we get into that state and we're like, oh, I can swear, I can have a beer, I can do whatever I want. because I'm not thinking about myself. None of that is me trying to measure up to this purity test. None of this is me trying to get somewhere. Holy shit, I'm free. And that changes everything. But our brain, when we're confused, especially in identifying, we always see a journey. We always see, there's me now, and then there's me in the future. It's like, but you're the same me. The only difference is how much crap you're holding on to.
Yeah, I think that's, since meeting you and interacting with you, I beforehand, it's a lot clearer now, just through my own experiences too. But before, I've told you that I've gotten kind of caught up in, being this person who posts on social media and thinking that, oh, because of that, I have to, like, not drink as much, or, be something else. And it's just so freeing. And for one, I have very little desire to drink at all anymore, especially with, I don't know, the mushrooms are
Oh,
like kind of kicking that for some reason. And
can't
just the
imagine.
idea that there, like, there is a reason that people drink. And no one, I don't know, maybe some people like the taste, but I think that's a lot fewer than maybe would admit. But the idea that there is no way to be it, and I think it's become clearer why initially, when we were talking about people like Eckhart Tolle, something like that, how he has sort of like morphed in this figure where he, talks very quietly and very slow, and oh, it is what is, and it is
Hmm.
peace. And it's like, you don't have to do that,
At
man.
all.
Like, you can just
Emote.
be here now. Yeah, realizing
Absolutely.
that is, it's almost like he doesn't think that he can do that, and it's almost like he feels like he has to be more like that type of person,
Well, it's a
and
sense
you
of
don't.
control, right? It's
Yeah.
another sense of control. As I in this state, I'm very calm and I feel at peace and I feel, like I'm in what is. Whereas if I were to get emotional, I might lose that. I mean, it's like riding too fast on a bike, right? And if you lack faith in yourself, then yeah, you'll start to immediately grasp for that sense of control, as we always do when we start to feel like we're losing it. But it's very much like walking a tightrope. The more you worry about it, the harder it is, right?
Mhm.
You just have to walk the rope. You have to feel your balance. You have to just keep moving forward, and you will find your stride, right? Your sea legs, as I referred to it the other day, right? You'll
Mhm.
find your stride, but you actually have to trust in yourself. You actually have to get out there and start dancing. You can't just think about the dance moves, and you can't stick to a certain dance just because that's where you feel comfortable in the dance, because the dance is always changing. And if you're not, then you're not really dancing. And that's when everybody starts pushing you around because you're not in the flow.
Or you think there's an idea of where you should be. It's like, well, you're here, so you couldn't be anywhere. Whether you think you should or you shouldn't. And yeah, it almost seems like with people like that who are very spiritual and ceremonial, it's like they've realized it, but they're still, maybe he thinks that if he acts like that, he'll sell more books or something, or who knows, or that if he doesn't act like that, then maybe he doesn't have enough trust in himself to express
Got it.
freely. I mean, maybe that is him expressing freely, but
From all accounts, and I've met a few people who have met him, he is like that in person. Like that's just the way he is. There's a certain calm reservation about him. And again, I think that a lot of that is how he's learned to live. I think a lot of that is again our concepts of what it is to be enlightened or spiritual or at peace. I always find, to me, my favorite imagery of being at peace is laughing my ass off with a friend, listening to some music in the background or something. To me, that's peace. Whereas a lot of people in the spiritual community, especially, will see like somebody sitting in the lotus position on a mountaintop. It's like, okay, like that's peaceful, right? That's lovely, but it doesn't matter what the emotion is or what the circumstances are. It doesn't matter what you're doing, right? It's peace. It's an inner thing. It's not even an inner thing. It's just what you are. It's just what you're radiating, because you're not analyzing yourself. You're not criticizing yourself all the time. You are not a thing. It's like Doctor Strange. Have you ever seen that movie?
I don't think I've seen that one.
There's this fantastic line in Doctor Strange because they're talking about his abilities and the fact that he's a very smart man. He was a surgeon. He's always excelled in everything. But there's one insight that he never got, which is that it's not about him. And the whole movie just comes right back down to that insight. Like, it's not about you individually. It's not about you separate from everything else. It's not about you, the idea. And that's exactly the point, is that the more we get caught up in that idea, the more we squander our incredible ability, the more we end up just playing pretend instead of living in the world. It's not about
Mm,
us.
yeah. And having an idea of who you are, even like, it's just clinging, almost like knowing yourself or having an idea of who you are is clinging to something in the past of what was in a moment. And then you've sort of, it's almost like you hit pause there and you're like, oh, that's who I am. And it's like, I had all these things and now it's like, that's who I am. And then I'm going to, try and be that. And then it's like, oh, life wants this, but I know I'm this person, I'm this. And it's like builds this resistance and like detachment and whatever you
And
want to say, but even,
conflict
yeah.
immediately, right? It's like, I am a right turning ship. It's like, well, the wind's going left. Doesn't matter. I'm a right turning ship. It's like, you don't have to say, like, you can just turn. You don't have to abide by this idea. You can just adapt, right? But that's what we do. It's like, no, this is what's always kept me feeling safe. This is what's always kept me feeling secure. It's like, right. And as we said before, there's nothing more secure than a prison cell.
And what you said too, there's so many things that you've said previously that have just made more and more sense recently. And with Gary Vee saying that, he can't swear less because that's not who he is. It's like that sort of like, this is who he's becoming. He's becoming, oh, this is who he is. And now he's been that person for, 10 years. And that's who he is. And it's boxed up and packaged into a nice little cell.
And what's worse is that now he has followers who are like, yeah, that's who he is. That's why I support him. And then you have other followers who are like, oh, I don't like how he is there. It's like, yeah, he could change. Right. And that's the thing, is that we get caught up in ideas about him in the same way that he gets caught up in ideas about him. And so everybody is dealing with their ideas of each other and nobody's actually in a relationship. And that's the funniest part, right? Especially in conversations, you get into a conversation. And if you're in the habit of identifying, you're not actually in that conversation. You're seeing all of your assumptions about that person, which validate your assumptions about you. And they're doing the same thing. So now you have two images talking to images and nobody's talking to each other.
All just ideas of what is.
And that's why
um
often you'll run into people, and what they'll do is they will tell you who they are. They will say, oh, people think this about me, and this person was saying this about me, and this you'll never guess what I do, and this is just who I am. And they will tell you their story. And this is why in initial life coaching sessions, I would always let people just talk for 90 minutes. It's like, tell me who you think you are, because in doing that, I can find your problems.
mhm. Yeah, I've always found it interesting, the idea of someone asking who you are, or tell me about yourself, or who are you, like with job stuff and resumes. And it's like, how do you even say that? And you just say a bunch of things that have happened in the past that you were, there for, basically.
That was it, right? Absolutely. And you cherry pick the things that are going to give you that sense of control. Like, you're like, no, look, I did this and this and this and this. And of course, anybody who wants to believe those things will go, hey, that's great. This is who we're hiring. And then 6 months later, they hear, when you were 20 years old, you got drunk or stupid or something, and then they're firing you, like, oh, you're not the person we hired. It's like, why are you making assumptions to begin with? Right? Obviously, I'm a human being. I've went up and down, on the roller coaster of stupidity. Everybody has, but we have assumptions like, oh no, perfect. It's like you were saying about that person you passed on the street. Like, how could you break up with me? I was the perfect girlfriend. It's like, that's not how that works. People change. People are always changing. And so many relationships, it's like, you're not the person I thought you were. Exactly. You got it. I'm not the person you thought I was. I never was. Why were you thinking I was a certain person outside of trying to validate what you thought you needed?
Yeah, exactly. I am something I wanted to ask you about, and you talked about, not needing psychedelics to get to these realizations, and I certainly see that more clearly now. but I have, along my sort of process of getting into all of these things over the last probably been, I don't know, 4 years or so, pretty much since right around when I graduated college. Um, and I've been meditating pretty much regularly for all of that time. And more recently, I feel like it's like I don't need to
Nope.
almost. And I'm curious because a lot of people talk about, even someone commented on my most recent video about how, nothing matters, basically do what you want. This is all a game happening for no one, for no reason whatsoever. So like, stop taking it so seriously, or take it seriously. It doesn't matter. Like, do whatever you want. And someone said, like, we came here for reasons like you'll see soon. And I commented, came from where? And they're like, you'll see soon. Or then eventually it came to, we came from source energy and we will return there, but we always will be. And I'm like, I see what you're saying there, but I feel like you're kind of missing the idea that you're everyone. You're clinging to this idea that you're you, that lasts forever, separate from everyone else all the time, everywhere, forever. And they never responded to that one. But
no, because
yeah,
you're touching on the uncomfortable bit. And it's funny, an old friend of mine has been listening to our podcast, and at the end of episode 1, I said something along the lines of, hey, that was a great episode. We managed to get into some really good conversations without getting into the uncomfortable bits. And of course, he wrote to me, he's like, what are the uncomfortable bits? And it's like, okay, well, it's all fun and games until you realize you're all that is, right? And that's it, is that once you get there, things start changing. The conversation starts changing. And that's where the spiritual crowd often doesn't want to go, because I would rather believe there is a journey. I would rather believe that there is a source that I'm going to, reunite with, that there is a separation between me and everything else, so it doesn't have to just be me. That's all it is. And you kind of touched on that in one of your previous trips. It really is just me in everything. And that gets super uncomfortable at first. And like, there's a lot that goes with that. The entire emotional spectrum from loneliness to aloneness is in that, because it's eternal. It's the idea that you are all that is forever. And so when we're having that experience, it's very jarring when we're used to thinking of ourselves as me as opposed to everybody else. It feels very lonely. And then after a while, when you're there, you start realizing this actually doesn't change a thing. This doesn't change a single thing, except I don't have to be as afraid, right? And I can love more freely because I'm loving myself. And so it changes the emotional spectrum of the experience that we're having. But at first, it seems super uncomfortable to admit you're all that is, because we're used to thinking of it in terms of loneliness and aloneness. But it doesn't change a thing. It doesn't change a thing. It just means you are so vast, you don't have to worry about being alone, right? Like, there's so many different varieties of you. You can avoid it for eternity, go nuts, right? Or you can look at it straight in the face and be free.
Yeah, it cuts through all those ideas that like there is nothing that can go wrong. There is nothing to worry about. List off some things to worry about, and I'll tell you things that you don't have to. And the idea of the eternal now, us being for eternity, it's scary if you're clinging to an idea that you're just you, or even just the idea of eternity.
Yep.
is a scary idea, but it's not what is. What is
now.
Is just now. Yeah.
Right. That's it. It's always now. It's always now, because everything that could exist is within now, and it's all within our awareness, which is why you can imagine pretty much anything, can't you? Right. And that it's all clues to exactly the reality of the situation, that all of existence exists within the void that predated the Big Bang, or at least that we look at as the Big Bang. All of existence, all the potential that could exist within duality existed within that void that was nothing and everything. Well, that was our awareness. That's exactly where we still are. We're still in the void. We just perceive time, right? Like, for me to be sitting in this office right now, for for this experience to exist as a present moment, my awareness goes, but it had to come from somewhere, right? And so immediately all of the moments that could exist to lead to here exist within time and space. And all the moments that could lead from here to my inevitable death exist within time and space, because I perceive duality. So I can't just perceive the existence of one moment without my brain immediately going, but there had to be a before and an after, right? Because that's the experience of duality. So everybody talks about the Big Bang like it happened, and we're somewhere in the process of it happening, but it never happened. We have the perception of it happening because it's within the void. It's within the potential of whatever could be, right? So our brain creates time. Our mind creates time, but every moment is existent forever, forever. And so our entire perspective of the Big Bang is just based on our awareness going, no, this couldn't just exist on its own. It had to have a progression. There had to be something that led to it. And that's our history in a nutshell, is just the logical steps to make this moment happen in existence.
I don't know if I'm quite there with you. That was going to be something that I wanted to ask you about, was the Big Bang. And I understand now when you were talking about, before, what was before existence and before what happened. It's like, what do you mean? It's existence. What could be before non-existence? Like it is existence. Yeah. Like, but the idea of, the void and the Big Bang and all of those things, like
it's
like,
just the separation perceptually, right? Like everything is one. And how do you divide one into everything, right? And so we perceive time as the sequence of events that would divide one into everything, right? But all of those things exist within everything. We've just conceptually divided it. We've experientially divided it as well. Perceptually and experientially and conceptually, we've divided the world. But the world is still, or the universe is still, all and everything in one moment, whether we perceive it that way or not. And so that's kind of the fun part, is that we can experience time even though time doesn't exist. We can experience space and separation even though those things don't exist.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. That's why the Vedics used to always say, or the Vedas used to always say, I am that, you are that, we are all that. They didn't even give it a name. We're just that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm getting that with the beginning, the void that you're talking about, the Big Bang,
all of which are terrible ways to put it. It's just all I've got.
Yeah. Like, I know I want to say like, where did it start? But
all possible. Okay, so this is what's interesting, right? Is in Genesis, it says in the beginning, right? Well, the original translation was in a beginning, which I find very interesting, right? All possible beginnings and endings exist from the current moment, right? Like that's the whole thing, is that if you had a story that was just reality became aware of itself and then reality ceased being aware of itself, that story exists, right? But then if you drew out that story and you made it longer and longer and longer, and you ended up, reality became so disconnected from the awareness of itself that it started creating other little parts of itself and interacting with them, and those little parts made a story, and they get more and more complex over time, and that complexity bred an entire reality that being was now existing within, separate from itself perceptually only. And so that huge story suddenly exists because it has to, within the potential of what could be. So our story on this planet is just one of those potentials. The entire story of this universe is just one of those potentials, which is why science is getting more to the multiple universe theory, or the multiverse theory, right? Is that all different universes could possibly exist. Yeah, because all subjective experiences between the observer and the observed must exist, and the universe just facilitates all of those existing within what we deem to be time and space.
But why must they exist?
Because they're possible, right? All possibilities within the spectrum of duality exist within what is. right? We just experience the expression of those possibilities. We experience what those possibilities would be like, and we take it very seriously as though it's real, because it feels totally real, because of course it is absolutely real in its experience, but the perception we have of it as being real is slightly askew.
Yeah, I'm having a time. I was gonna say having a tough time wrapping my head or mind around that, but I feel
Here's a
like
good example. Say The Lord of the Rings. Have you ever read The Lord of the Rings?
I've seen. I don't think I've seen all the movies, but I've
Okay.
seen maybe two.
The Lord of the Rings is an incredible work of writing, because the author not only wrote the story in stunning detail, but created languages, full articulable languages in that story. And that was one of the reasons it's so amazing. Well, everything within that story, maybe not all the details, because of course everything in our experience is open to interpretation, happened somewhere at some time on some planet in space and time, somewhere. Because all things that can happen will happen somewhere at some time. The universe is far too big for it to not happen. The other thing is that time is far too long for it to not happen, because we look at the universe as being 16.5 billion years old, right? And then what? The universe ends, and then what? It starts over again. How many big bangs have there been, right? And if they're always in the now, if every experience in every one of those incarnations of the universe is always happening now, then all of those incarnations exist in the here and now, which is why I say everything that can exist within the now does in some expression of time and space.
Okay, I think I'm getting closer.
It's
But
difficult.
still, even the idea of everything that can happen must happen in the eternal now, like
Somewhere at some time. So what I mean is, like, there is an Andrew who at this moment is wearing a green sweater in the now instead of the sweater that you're wearing. Okay, that doesn't exist in this moment that we're experiencing, right? So the universe could come and go, Andrew could die, the planet could blow up, everything gets sucked back into nothingness, and it expands again. Maybe the next time around, another Andrew looks almost identical, has almost identical experiences, decides to wear a green shirt today. And in that moment of now, it exists, but we don't see it now. But it's still in the now. It's always in the now. And so that possibility has to eventually express itself in eternity. Eternity goes on forever. Everything that can exist within eternity will eventually. That's the whole point. That's why space is so big.
so it's almost like we're just experiencing,
Everything.
I was gonna say an expression of it.
Yeah. One
If
possibility, one
because it's
expression.
like in the eternal now, but it's almost like not this now.
But it is, because it's always this now, right? Because
Yeah.
think about it. So the
Yeah.
you that existed 5 minutes ago, if we were to rewind this video and go back 5 minutes, was in the now, right? And the you that is looking at me slightly different than that person is also looking at me in the now. And the only thing that separates the existence of those two nows, which are always in the present, always existing, is the process that you have viewed happening from one to the other. But they both exist in now.
Okay. All right.
Right?
I think I'm getting, yeah.
It's like it's looking at a movie script, like a reel. All of
Mhm.
those frames exist, but you can only see one of them at a time. They all exist. That's the point. The full movie from start to finish already exists, but you can only view one frame at a time. That's the
Okay.
entirety of creation. Everything that could be already is, but we get the
Mhm.
view of one thing at a time from a perspective of separation. It's an amazing thing. It's an incredible gift if you think about it. God was able to fool itself into thinking it's not God.
So it's almost like, I imagine if we were able to take a step back or go into, if time is the fourth dimension, we were able to go into the fifth dimension almost and like see everything. And it's like we are three-dimensional things existing in a four-dimensional universe, or experiencing a four-dimensional universe, or
See, now
perceptive
that's
of.
which one's dominant? Are you the awareness? Are you what is first and human second, or are you a human first and what is second? And that's very much, we keep coming back to this, right? Because that's the religious thing. I don't want to be all it is, right? I want to be a human with a journey, right? I don't want to come to full responsibility of being the awareness of everything. I don't want to be, responsible for this, essentially. That's all it is. I want to hold on to my fears and my concerns. I want to hold on to my petty jealousies, because the alternative is coming into alignment with this and looking at what I've created, which at the moment is kind of a fucking nightmare. Right? Like, the world that we've made is so disconnected from what we're talking about because we've been avoiding it for so long. We keep waiting for God to come save us, and the entire time we're sitting here having a drink waiting for it. It's like, yeah, all you have to do is go out and do something. And we know this. We know this collectively. There's more and more people who are like, we can change the world. We can fix the climate. We can fix the system, but we have to do it. And then you have another portion of society. It's like, no, no, no. There are people in charge to do that. And it's not me. It's not me. I'm not responsible. And that is the next evolution of our species. If we make it that far, is to realize it's always us. It's always us. There's no passing the buck. If we're going to destroy the planet, that's on us. We can't blame others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But also, like, so how far do you think you go? I mean, I was going to say, how far should you go? But there is not, no should.
How far can you go?
In the sense of, I guess, if you want to dedicate every minute of every second of your day to, trying to do something, you can.
You see, I look at it this way. It's like we were saying earlier, right? We embody the universe when we get out of the way. And that's it, right? Like, the more I get out of my way, the more I realize the impact I have on people I talk to has changed. And then I see them carry that ripple with them and affect other people. But it's never through me trying to convince them of anything. Right. So it's always just allowing things to happen as they should. And if you look at society, like we were saying the other day about crutches, streetlights and stuff like that, we're holding back our own evolution by putting, child locks on everything. We're baby proofing everything. And as a result, we don't grow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's because as we talked, I think I talked about it on episode 1 or 2, this idea of, how can I be so happy if there's so much suffering, blah, blah, blah. But it's almost like it just has to come from within. And we are the universe embodied as, different things, sort of different, but, perceived as different.
Totally.
And if we're not going to do anything by going outside, like we are, but we aren't going to do anything by going outside of ourselves and trying to, almost like force that to happen, that change, as opposed to just being that change that ripples. Like, be the change you want to see.
There's no control in it, right? Like that's the problem. It's like what people do when I'm suffering through a lot of overthinking. I'm going through a lot of anxiety or depression. I need to meditate. And it's like, okay, that will help. That will help. But meditation itself isn't going to solve the problem. It's just going to kind of delay the consequence. What the problem is it your mentality that you're attached to, right? So going through the motions is going to help a little bit, but it's not going to address the infection that's underneath that Band-Aid, right? And the same is true for like what we're doing in the world. Like we're trying to sequester more carbon in the ground by encouraging hemp to be grown pretty much worldwide, which is a great idea for climate change. Does nothing about the capitalistic system that's going to continue to lobby for pollution. It's going to continue to lobby for things that allow those corporations to cut corners and save money and continue to pollute. So as much as portions of society are like, yeah, we can fix this by doing this thing, we are not in fact addressing the mentality that's going to continue to cause the problem, right? It's like if we were to suddenly stop driving cars today, all oil-based cars, we just stop driving them. It's not going to take long for a corporation to come up with an alternative that's just as profitable and has the same environmental impacts in one way or another. I mean, lithium batteries are brutal, right, for the environment. So the problem is the mentality that we're operating out of for everything else. But we keep trying to address the things we're doing instead of why we're doing them.
So yeah, so I sort of asked before, but like with meditation, it's a lot of things that I watch, especially when I've been watching a ton of stuff about psychedelics, a lot of YouTube videos and reading stuff and whatnot. And a lot of people say like, oh, it pairs well with meditation, and the idea of meditation sort of being a way through everything. And I was questioning, like, it's just sitting like becoming aware, the idea of becoming aware that you are, thinking so much, or even just bringing awareness, which I think it's almost like, I think it can be a good first step in a process, but it's not this end all be all. Like, it's almost become this fad that's like, oh, meditate to improve your
Yeah.
life and all of this. And it's like, Alan Watts talks a lot about how it's if you're using it as a tool to become, it's just setting aside time to be present, which you could be all the time without it also.
Yep.
So it's not necessary. Like, nothing is necessary.
Nope, I don't meditate.
Yeah.
Like that,
I figured you didn't.
I don't meditate. And by I don't meditate, I mean I don't go out of my way to sit down, close my eyes, and try. I just don't. Whereas to me, meditation is just non-attachment to the flow. Like, it's just watching it without any judgment, without any analysis. It's just watching it without opinion. And as soon as you're in that state and it's just flowing by, you can be doing anything. I used to love shoveling ditches. At one point when I was younger, I had a job shoveling ditches, and I found that to be one of the most meditative things I'd ever done in my life, because it was just going through the motions, watching it go by, right? But not all meditation is meditation. I mean, and that's unfortunately true. I've met a lot of clients in the past who said, oh, I have this great meditation that I do, and I'm immediately uncomfortable. It's like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, it's this process. I go through this guided meditation, and it teaches me to envision it this way. And I'm just like, Jesus, no wonder you're still suffering, because all you're doing is creating more stuff. You're still in the driver's seat. You're still in control. Now you're visualizing a certain feeling. Now you're cherry picking instead of just experiencing where you are and what is happening. You're superimposing your preferences again. And that's not meditation. But we convince ourselves it is because it feels good in the short term. It feels very calming to imagine yourself as a lotus blossom emerging into the sun, until you leave your house and you go into the street and somebody's like, get the fuck out of the way. Where's your lotus blossom there, right? Like, you need to be able to hear that guy and go, right, still disconnected. Doesn't mean anything about me. He's probably just having a bad day. Blah. Boom, moment of meditation, and had nothing to do with envisioning the sun or a growing tree or anything. It was just non-attachment.
Mm-hmm. I find it kind of funny when someone's I don't know if I saw it in a movie or like real life or something, but someone's sitting and meditating semi in public but in a quieter place, and then someone is like noisy nearby and they're like, shut up, you're ruining my meditation. It's like, yo, what? That's like, yeah,
Exactly
I
the
think
point.
you're missing something there.
I had a friend once who, and this is where it really became obvious to me. I was about 26, 27, and he would take himself so seriously that he would have a meditation time in the day. And if you try it, like, I was walking by his house one day, I went, oh, I'm just going to stop in and say, hey, his girlfriend comes to the door. Can't disturb him. He's in his meditation time. Like, for what? Like, obviously, so nothing disturbs him, so this shouldn't bother him at all. Right? Like, that's the point. But and he was very upset about it, but it's because, like, oh, I need this time. It's like, come on, like, it doesn't have to be another facet of your ego. It doesn't have to be another arduous journey. This is not a practice of I'm climbing Everest. It's a practice of realizing you are Everest. Like, there's nothing to climb.
And I think it just reinforces, because these are things I'm loving these discussions, because we're breaking through my own habitual patterns. I'm very much someone who has always had, routines and ideas of, having a very structured to-do list for my day, and, going through doing manifestations, doing a meditation, and being consistent about it. And the idea that it almost breeds this idea that there, or this illusion, like with your friend, that there's somewhere to get, and they're doing this thing so that, they have to do it for, I meditated for a year and now I'm here and I'm a changed person, and I've realized that now is all there ever is. It's like, well, it always was. And you going through, you didn't need that. And that's what I'm literally, as we speak, realizing, is because I've sort of, there have been times, especially when I was very attached to like meditating, I was like, oh, I have to meditate, and then I'll be busy one morning and then I'll miss it and I'll like feel bad about it. I'll be like, oh, I didn't meditate. Like, oh, am I going to be able to handle everything that comes at me today? Like, I don't know. I find sometimes that when I
There's
don't
the danger.
meditate, then I can't, take on the day, and I'll react certain ways because, oh shoot, why did I react that way? Oh, right, I didn't meditate this morning.
Right.
It's like, now I'm realizing I don't need that. It's like something you need until you realize that you don't. It's kind of same with suffering. It's like suffering is necessary until you realize that it isn't.
Yeah.
And
The
I think it's just,
identity the same.
yeah, yeah,
It is. I mean, that's the only thing, is that I still use my identity. I have no problems using my identity. Hi, I'm Ray. No problem at all. I don't take any of it seriously. I know it's just a tool. It's a way of communicating. It's a very convenient way of trying to communicate, concepts and languages and jokes and all of the fun stuff that goes with duality. Because again, if there was no perception of division, there would be no humor, right? Because humor is almost always at someone else's expense, right? So all of the experience that we have within division and duality is a beautiful thing, until you get caught up in it, until you start thinking, oh no, my interpretation is what is. And it's like, it's not. It's just what you're seeing right now, right? It's just the facet that you're becoming aware of as you turn that crystal around and you look at all the different angles, right? Like that's all interpretation is. That's all perception is. But we tend to think what I think is real, right? Somebody asked me recently, it's like, they're trying to get this. They're really trying to understand, like, how are we all the same thing? I don't understand how we're all the same awareness. And it's like, right, because you think you are what you think you are. And that sounds simplistic, because it is, unfortunately, as simplistic as it gets. So long as you think your thoughts can reflect truth, you cannot see unity. You just can't experience it, right? Because you're in the way. Whatever you're doing, you're thinking about unity, you're thinking about a concept, you're thinking about, which is always dualistic. If you're thinking about unity, then you're thinking about separation by contrast. You're thinking, right? The only way to experience unity is to be unity, which is not a state of thought. It's not a state of anything. It's just what is. It's just getting out of the way and going, oh, right, I'm not separate from any of this. I'm not, there is no division outside of the one that I'm convinced, or rather committed to perceiving.
definitely. It brings me back to the idea that there is, I feel like as humans, we get caught up in this idea of adding to ourselves and becoming something and being on this journey and this process. And I think above all is, the only journey should be, realizing that there isn't one, but also that there is nothing, that like all of these ideas of that you think you're adding to yourself. It's more so just peel them back is, I want to say better, but will bring you
Clearer.
close, clearer.
I will
Yeah.
say clearer. That I will
Yeah.
say. It's not better. This is the one thing I always worry about when, in terms of spiritual conversations, is that we start talking about levels of
Mhm.
awareness, levels of consciousness, levels of spirituality. And I said this in one of my one of my earliest TikTok videos. It's like, there are no levels. There are only directions towards yourself and away from yourself. That's it. There are no levels. Like everybody is always what is, and they always have the capacity to realize it in a moment, just like that. Sometimes it's a near-death experience, sometimes it's psychedelic, sometimes it's just losing everything, but it's always there, always. It's just a matter of letting go of our fight, and that's why faith is such an interesting concept to me. Like I said, I was raised Roman Catholic, as were you, and we were drilled with this idea of faith over and over and over again, faith and humility, right? And never made any sense. Like I got it as a Christian. I'm like, yeah, okay, faith, everything's gonna be fine. God's got my back. But then I immediately had preconceptions of what that meant. I immediately thought to myself, well, this is what that means to be fine, and I'm going to pray for that. And so praying is, for a certain end result is still control. Faith in an end result is still control, right? So it's not actually faith. So you're not actually being present. And of course, how could you be if you're having faith in an external being that doesn't exist? So now you've left yourself again, you're back in identity, right? And so you've immediately just lowered your sense of awareness. And what's odd is that all that happens when we raise our sense of awareness is that we're just becoming more aware of what is always the case, that we're not separate, right? So you immediately know you're losing awareness if you're starting to think about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of these things come back to, any struggles. It's like, we were talking about thoughts, but also just the idea of who you are, which is, I guess, a thought too, but it's the identification and the realization like, oh, I want to think everything's unity. Like I am that person too. And it's like, you're still holding on to this idea that you are this person, or, you're this spirit experiencing a person or something separate. And it's just what is.
That's right.
It's
And
always has
the
been.
danger there is that you end up projecting your view of yourself into that person, right? Like, so you start expecting how you view your intentions to be reflected through their actions. And that's when you end up with expectations and frustrations. Like, well, I would never act that way. It's like, you would in that situation, in that person's life, but you're so caught up in thinking of yourself through the lens of your current life that you can't see that, right? So it's again negation. It's getting past the idea that you would do anything in particular, that you would act in any way in particular that allows you to see yourself in that person's eyes, not as a conceptual thing, but an actual moment of recognition where you can feel where they're coming from, what their intentions are, and where they're going. But it's never conceptual. That's why I find life coaching and psychology to be so funny, and yet so totally wrong in its direction, because they will almost teach you a structure to help people with. And it's like, oh, if this is happening, go back to this. This is probably coming from this, this, and this, and this. But they don't teach you to feel that in the moment. They don't teach you how to be present with that person, to get your mind out of the way and to allow that spontaneous intelligence that we were talking about embodying to actually act, right? Because in a coaching session, as with in a friendship or a relationship or a marriage or anything, your relationship in that moment is going to be more or less beneficial based on how present you both are. So if we're not teaching that to psychologists, if we're not teaching that to therapists, how to be present, then all we're doing is arming them with another intellectual idea of themselves. And they're going into these sessions where they could be helping to promote unity, and they're creating division only as a result of the mentality that they're holding on to. So it's so sad that we haven't gotten this point yet. Like this, and conversations that have been happening like this for a long time, are going to continue to change that. In the same way that Carl Jung affected Alcoholics Anonymous, right? The founder of Alcoholics Anonymous went and talked to Carl Jung when he was developing that system. And it was Carl Jung's entire insight about the collective consciousness, that we aren't divided, that allowed them to realize one of the last steps in the 12-step process is the acknowledgement of a higher power, that you are part of something greater, right? And so these insights are changing our society. But it's like you were saying earlier, it's like we almost start to focus on the actions that we're taking instead of the mentality that those actions came from, right? It's like, I'm going through the 12-step process, and it's like, right, but if you could find the mentality of the person who created that 12-step process in yourself, then the 12-step process is irrelevant. You see the whole picture. Now it's just going through the stage or going through the process, right? So it's always just awareness. It's a one-step process, awareness. It's so hard to explain, but that's what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like with those processes, and if you're not coming from this place of unity, you're just giving out a bunch of fish as opposed to, teaching people how to fish. That old
Got it.
saying. It's like you gave them 10 or 20 fish, and something starts coming up and they're like, oh shit, which fish is it? It's that one that I'm supposed to eat in this situation. It's like they don't realize they can just learn how to fish, and then they never have to remember which fish to have. They don't have to hold on to any fish. They can just catch a new one each and every time. And that's
exactly
it.
And that's ultimately, the epitome of martial artists mentality as well, right? Is like Bruce Lee said, no form as form. It's, you are in the moment, and as much as all the structures and all the movements you've learned in the past might influence what you're going to do, as soon as you make an assumption about what's going to happen, you're no longer in that moment. You've cut your ability to adapt to it in half at least. And so it's always going into the situation realizing I don't have control. I have influence if I'm present. And that was one thing my Sifu, he really drilled that home into me. It was like, the more you're thinking about the outcome, the more likely it is you're going to lose this fight. Because you're not in it.
Yeah. It's like with almost anything like that, the test analogy, having half of your focus on the outcome of the test, how you're going to do, and half of it on the test itself. That's, or the archery or anything. It always just comes back to being there, being in it, always, not, focused on any other potential outcome, what might be.
It's like we're superimposing a narrative over our experience. Like we're experiencing what is, and then we're like, no, that's not what I want to see. I want to see this. And so we superimpose a story over what we're doing, and then it changes the experience as a result, right? Like I've had jobs where if I just went to work and I did my job, I would have learned something about myself that day. Instead, I went to work and bitched about my job. And so all I learned about was complaining about my job. All I learned about was the experience that I was superimposing on what was. So now instead of just learning from the experience, I had to learn that I was superimposing an experience, and to get out of the way to get back to the lesson that I could have been learning to begin with, right? So it's always just adding distortion, right? We just put a story in there and that changes it.
Like clinging to any belief precludes you from understanding its opposite, or believing in anything, cuts you off from anything that may come from being open to that idea or belief or concept or structure not being the truth. And it's like it never is. No matter what, there is no belief that is ultimate truth, because ultimate truth is not a belief. So it couldn't be. It just is. It just is, always, forever.
It's not a concept. It's not a concept. That's the thing. I repeat this in my comment section constantly, because it's the crux. Concepts aren't truth. Concepts are not reality. They can point to reality. They can indicate reality. They can try and describe reality, but the description is never the described. And until we get that, we get really focused on the description. We get really focused on the described, because it's easier, right? Like it's easier to talk about a building than to understand how it's built.
Yeah, for sure. And I had a question you brought up with like AA stuff in the 12th step. I'm not familiar with the process. I've heard some things, even just videos I make, people are like, oh, sounds like some of the steps from AA. And it makes sense that Carl Jung, that I get that now, how that's correlated. But the idea at the end with the higher power, I've always been curious about that. And I've sort of seen it with the idea that we are that higher power always. And it's almost like we just have so many fucking layers that we have forgotten or don't realize it, or think that we're not, or think that it's something else. But
or we don't want to think that it's us.
Yeah. Or I feel like with that being, 12th step, sort, it's almost like, I feel like a lot of people could believe in a
Yeah,
separate other power,
for
and
sure.
that seems a little bit,
So
concerning.
it can be. I think it's important to remember that the 12-step process, or AA, or any anonymous group, for example, they're designed to take people out of a really, really like low energy state. They're designed
Hmm.
to try and pull people out of a certain hell. Um, there, it's 12 steps to being free of the attachment to the addiction, but it's not necessarily 12 steps to being free. And so you can look to a higher power, and that might help you see yourself as a part of everything else. You can see more of a purpose in your life, or you can see more meaning in what you do. But it's just as dangerous to get stuck on that, to get stuck on the idea that there is that higher power. So the next stage beyond that is to recognizing that any division you perceive between yourself and that higher power is still that existent identity, that's still that existent idea of yourself, which ultimately was the reason you fell into alcoholism, which ultimately was the reason that you fell into despair. So it's always just the process of slowly shedding that, right? Whereas the 12-step process, they don't take you all the way to the end where it's like, now you're everything, right? They take you to the end where it's like, now you don't have to worry about going out in public and drinking yourself to death, because you have a sense of meaning and purpose. Okay, now go on and carry on your own, right? So it's not meant to be the full
Hmm.
on thing. It's kind of like Deepak Chopra. He wrote this book, How to Know God, and it's a good book. I definitely recommend reading it. It's got some really interesting some stories in there, and some anecdotal evidence, and some historical context about the various levels of awareness from going to being separate to recognizing that you and God are one. And it does a great job all the way through to the end. And then he stops before the inevitable recognition that there is no division at all, because we don't want to have that conversation. We really don't. You'll notice, like, spirituality will get to a certain level of depth, and then it will almost stop for the sake of continuing to perpetuate its own practice. Because, as you said, after a certain point of awareness, all practices become pointless, or rather they are no longer the point, right? They're just practices. So if you can practice meditating, you can practice kung fu, you can practice darts. Either one is going to bring you to a more refined state of awareness if you're able to use it that way, if you're able to be in that state of awareness when you're doing it, instead of using it to get you there. It's the
And
cart before the
it
horse.
yeah, yeah, it's literally anything. Like, you can create a podcast and be fully there, and that's it. You can, you know, walk around for 15 days straight, and that's it. You can, you know, try to start drinking more water, and if you're there when you're drinking the water, like, that's it. It's like it's literally doing anything whatsoever.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you don't need anything, because what is, and that's it. And that's like the end of it. So I'm like, with Deepak Chopra, like with his book, did he do that in a way for people to realize it on their own, or because he wanted to,
That's a
you know,
great question.
make sure that people, didn't get there, so they kept needing
Or is it just something
things?
he doesn't want to see? Is that as far as he was able to go based on what he was
So,
prepared to accept? Right. And it's like in the Matrix, the Oracle says we can never see past decisions that we're not prepared to make.
mhm,
Right. And that's kind of
yeah.
it. It's like it makes you wonder why, like, how so many of these spiritual teachings, or so many of these teachers, or these avatars, stopped at certain points. Right. And it's because that was as far as they were comfortable. Because I'll say, and I'm not putting myself on a pedestal by any means, but I'm old and I've been at this for 20 years, and it feels like an eternity. And every time, or rather regularly, there are moments where I am once again faced with the realization that I'm still holding on to an idea of myself. And so I have to let it go. I have to, and I don't have to, I choose to. I choose to, because to me, it's what drives me. And it's not because I want to get anywhere, but because I can. It's fun. Why not? And I enjoy seeing the ripples around me. But I mean, at the end of the day, not everybody's going to continue to do that. And in my life, I've seen many people just kind of fall away because it was the idea, I don't want to go that far. I don't want to see that. I don't want to let that go. I want to continue thinking that, you know, a partner is going to give me value, or I want to continue thinking that focusing on the future is going to get rid of my anxiety. I'm just not prepared. You know, I actually had somebody on TikTok. It was great. It was this young guy 6 months ago, and I made a video, and he responded. He was quite angry about it, and it was because, you know, I was talking about being one and blah blah blah. And so we ended up in this conversation and went back and forth for like half a day. And by the end of it, he went, "So what you're saying is that my idea of myself is just an idea, that the reality behind it is that I'm an extension of everything." And he stopped and he looked at his screen and he went, "I don't think I'm ready to see that yet." And it was about as honest an answer as I could ever hope. But the seed was there. It was planted. The conversation happened, and it wouldn't have had I got defensive. If I was trying to defend a certain idea or a concept or an idea of myself, I would have been offended when he's like, "Well, yeah, I think you're full of shit." It's like, yeah, I might be, probably. Let's work through it, right? Because we can. And so at least if we can get to a point where we have that conversation where people can clearly say, "Yeah, I'm not quite ready for that yet." That's a lot better than going, "No, there's nothing there." Right? That changes things significantly. And again, as with everything, because we're going to have to wrap this up soon, it's a one-step process. It's always just the one-step process of allowing yourself to be aware. And the more you do that, the more it changes everything.
Yeah, so much. It's been pretty awesome. I love this, and the the idea of it being scary is, I don't know. It's not at all. It's like more exciting than anything I've ever experienced in my life. And yeah, it's like I find myself, even, you know, the last couple of weeks, like I always and a lot of times I will, you know, listen to an audiobook, listen to music walking around, but I find myself more and more not listening to, not even having headphones in, walking around New York, and I just listen to everything, and I'm just aware of what is, and I'm like, wow, this is all me.
That's it.
Pretty cool. This is a pretty
And
cool place.
existence becomes fulfilling, as it
Mhm.
always was if we allowed it to be, right? Like, I don't, people have asked, like, "Have you read this spiritual book that just came out?" I said, "I don't read spiritual books. You know, I don't listen to any of that stuff anymore unless it pops up, like if it's on my For You page, or if it's on YouTube or something. Oh, an Alan Watts clip. It's like, sweet. But I don't need it. I don't look for it. It's just there if I run across it, right? Because I'm the point. You're the point, right? This moment here now is the entirety of existence, if we can allow ourselves to get out of the way and witness it for what it is. But as long as we're convinced that I am what I think I am, right, then I'm not following that one-step process of, you know, questioning that until I become aware of what I actually am, which is not a concept.
Mhm. Yeah, and clean, like all those things, you know, spiritual books, you know, speeches, anything like that. It's almost like if they got it and they're expressing it, they're all saying the same exact thing, just doing their best to leave seeds for people who have, you know, have ears to hear. And so you're just listening to the same thing over and over. And I've heard some Alan Watts clips that I've heard many times before in speeches, and it makes so much sense now than before, because I had all these ideas of what things were and who I was. I was like, I mean, it sounds good, like it kind of makes me feel good, but it's like, what's he really saying? It's like, oh, he's just saying the same thing over and over in different ways, figuring out different ways to say it, and it's all the same. And him and everyone else who has ever understood that and attempted to express it in language, in words, which is not an easy thing to do.
Obviously, look at us, right? We're doing the exact same thing. But it's interesting to me that because all there is you, then it's always been you trying to express this to yourself. Always. And we always are. If we open our ears and listen, the lessons are everywhere. Like, we learn it in everything. You can stare at a tree growing and learn all you need to know about your own nature if you have the ears to hear, if you have your eyes wide open, right? And that's it, is that you don't need a guru, you don't need a structure. They're all nice and they can teach you things, sure, but there's always the danger of becoming attached, right? And so just keep focusing on that one-step process, right?
Mhm.
I'm so excited, man. I love these conversations, and I love the pace with which you are growing. It's so interesting and fun for me, because as you said, you're going through your own process while we have this conversation, but of course so am I, right? Like, I'm walking away from these podcasts refining the things that I go through. I'm walking away from these going, right, yeah, I'm still crazy, but I'm not the only one, that kind of thing, right? Like, it's encouraging, because the conversation is really all we need to do. We just need to keep having this conversation. And the more people that do, with the intention of just having the conversation, of just, practicing that one-step process again, right? The more we're going to continue to gain awareness, not just individually, but collectively, which is also individually.
Mhm.
You know
Yeah.
how it goes. Yeah. So we're going to wrap up episode 3, because it's been almost an hour and a half now. And as everybody who listens to this knows, we tend to keep talking. We do have a upcoming social anxiety workshop on October 19th. You can find the details on social media, or of course on our website. And as well, you can find some more exclusive content and video content on our Patreon page for only $5 a month. And I will be away going camping as of tomorrow. I will be gone until next weekend, so you may not see much activity from me online, but definitely contact Andrew if you have any questions, or if you want to just challenge where he is right now, because that's probably the best thing for him.
Definitely. Yeah. And feel free, I think YouTube comments are probably the best way to reach either of us directly. I tend to respond to pretty much any and every YouTube comment I get. It's a lot more difficult to do that on other platforms. But if you do have questions about this, things you want us to expand on, please comment them down below.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you next week for episode 4.